Hello YouTube, this video is about this hole in the dash right here. I want to mount this tack and shift light in the hole. I have a brace right here that we put in to stiffen up the steering wheel so we have something to mount to. Let's unbox it and see what we get. Some instructions. A nighttime diffuser, a tack with some wires, a shift light, a bracket, and that's it. I've played around with the location of the tack a little bit. And if I put it like that, it's really nice because you can see the whole face of the tack. But if I put the shift light on top of it, it's blocked by the steering wheel. You can't see it. I know it's traditional to mount the shift light on top or slightly to the left, but I think I'm going to mount the tack and the shift light so the shift light is on the bottom. That way the shift light is completely visible to the driver. And the tack range from 0 to 7,000 is visible to the driver, but the top of the tack is not. This thing won't rev anywhere near that, so I think this is the way we're going to mount it. The bracket should be 1 7/8 inches in back of the step and the tachometer. The bracket for the shift light underneath the bracket for the tachometer, and we're going to put it on the bottom. So it's going to look like that. I think the most difficult part of this install is going to be finding the location to drill the holes for the tack on the brace for the steering column. But it looks like it wants to be between there and there. And I think what we'll do is we'll take the tack out of the brace and just use the brace to mark it. We have the starting points marked, we just have to get the angle right. So it's got to go something like that. We have to take a punch and punch the center of this hole. So now we have to drill this hole. There we go, we're through. Now we have to drill it out bigger. And the drill doesn't fit with the bit through the hole. So we're going to have to do it like this. Fortunately, it's a sharp drill. And get a bolt and try our fitment. So let's tighten some bolts up here and see what it looks like. We have the tack bolted in with one bolt so far. And this is what the driver sees. The camera is actually sitting on the backrest, and this is the view a driver would have going down the track. Now we have to do something about these wires. I want to make it so the tack can be removed from the dash. So we'll use some Deutsch connectors to connect the tack to the wiring harness. I've gathered all the tools necessary to make one ground connection to the body for the tack in one place. First thing we got to do is cut a length of wire long enough to get to a Deutsch connector. We need to strip the end without getting any of the wires clipped. Take our connector that we're going to use to screw to the body of the vehicle. Twist the wire down. Put the connector on. Crimp it. Put it in our little holder here. Take a soldering gun and some solder and solder our connection. So we got a nice tight joint. Take our wire, take some heat shrink and run it down the wire over our connector and use a heat gun to heat up the heat shrink. And we have one good ground wire. What we have here is a screw that's going into the firewall, which is a great ground that's already being used as a ground to the instrument panel. We'll take our ground wire that we just made and put it underneath the ground for the instrument panel and screw that back into the firewall. Okay, so I'm happy with that ground. That's a good ground for the tach. These are the leads from the tach, and this is for light, this is for power, this is for ground, and this is for tach signal. What I have here is a lead from the lights on the instrument panel. And the way the car is wired is when you turn the ignition on, the lights and the gauges come on. So this power will be on all the time. So we're going to use this for the power for the tach and the lights for the tach. In order to do that, what we have to do is splice into this because we need two leads from here. We'll use a wire stripper and carefully strip the wire back a little bit so we have a bare section. We'll strip back some wire to wrap around our connection. I hate doing a connection like this, but I need two powers. I need one for the light and the tach and one for the power and the tach. And it's in the middle of the harness. There is a plug on one end and there'll be a plug on the other end so the piece can be removed if necessary. Now what we have to do is slide some heat shrink over it and take a heat gun and shrink it down. We have the connections we need for the tach. We have one lead for power, one lead for the dash light, a tach signal, and a ground. Now what we need to do is make a connection. To make the connection, what we have to do is first cut the wires off so that they're even. And so that we have room to work. This is our female Deutsch connector. And what we need to do is put pins on the ends of the four leads. First thing we do is strip the wire a little bit. Twist it. There we go. No stray copper. And we crimp it. And we have our first pin. Spray our ends up with a little bit of glass cleaner and slide the pins through the weather gasket. And lastly, the tach signal. And now we have to put the jack on. Got to get all the pins in all the holes and listen for them to snap in place. Now that we have all the wires in place and the pins on the inside of the jack fully seated, I don't know if you see them. By putting this green lock in, what you actually do is lock the pins in. Now it's a lock on the lock, so those pins aren't going to come out. So now we have the body side of the tach lines hooked up. Now we just have to do the same thing to the tach lines and we'll have a working tach. Now that we have the female ends on, we need to put them in the right order so that it all lines up with the body side. And we got to do that first with the weather seal. Gray is the tach signal from the MSD box. Green is the tach signal from the tach. And what we have to do is put that in the upper right hand corner of the weather seal so it'll plug in to the right spot in the jack. Next to the tach signal is the wire for the light in the tach, and that's in the upper left corner of the jack, and we'll put that in that position in the weather seal. Now to connect the tach to the body, all we got to do is slide that jack in. If we turn the ignition on, the needle zeroes and then goes to where you have the shift light point set at. And now what we're waiting for is the signal from the MSD box that the engine is running. However, I have to put the engine in order for it to do that. Through the magic of video, we now have an engine installed so we can check our tachometer. We'll turn the ignition on, which also turns the fuel pump on, and we'll start it up. So the shift light works and the tachometer works. I believe we've accomplished what we set out to do. We have a tach and shift light firmly mounted. It's visible to the driver. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.